I got everything set up, camera, lights, mic, all that. I was so excited to finally do an outdoor one where there's always some conflict. I prefer to shoot outside. It's more fun. And the second 8 o'clock hit, as Mark says, love the outside view. Thank you. As soon as it hit 8 o'clock, right when I was about to say go live, it began to rain. And so then I had to shove everything. I'm under an overhang right here, so even if it does rain, I should be okay. But naturally, it happens like on the second that I'm supposed to go live. And there's a little bit of drizzle. So far, we're safe, as we always do. And I do pride myself on being one of the only, if not the only, ghost hunting show that starts out with some food talk. I do like to do these icebreaker questions for anybody to participate in. You don't have to be out ghost hunting. This is all about kind of connecting, still chit-chatting. One of the reasons this started was because I missed the fact that I missed out on so many already this early in the year. So I missed out on so many great paranormal conventions I would have normally spoken at, and I was booked to speak at that fell through, from Austin to Rockford and Chicago, other places in between. So I kind of miss chit-chatting with people. And really quickly, I do like to just talk about what's been going on in the last week since we last talked on the global scale, since this is a historical event we are living through. America-wide, we have almost 1.4 million cases, 84,000 deaths. Worldwide, that's 4.2 million cases, and 285,000 deaths. Brazil now is one of the hotspots in the world. Their daily death count is at 608, and ours is at 1,500, which I hate to say that in a positive light, because obviously 1,500 deaths, that's insane. But it has been going down on a week-to-week basis. I think when I started doing this, it was at about 2,000, and each week I've done this, it's been about 100 less, maybe even 200 less from last week. So hopefully that trend continues, and part of that is everybody out there being knowledgeable and being smart when they're out and about. I wish I remember who said this, because it's such a great line, but you need to treat the entire world as if it's raw chicken. And if anybody has cooked with a raw chicken, they know, like, you're washing your hands constantly, just to be safe. So hopefully people continue to do that. And I will say again, trying to stay positive. It's been over 2 weeks now since the state of Georgia really opened up, and I was so fearful that by today we would see this crazy big spike in cases. And a lot of experts are still saying that's very much possible and right around the corner, but it hasn't happened yet. And so hopefully it won't happen, and that's because people are educated and being smart. I'm, fingers crossed on that. It's always going to be up to us to really. I always treat it like as if I have the virus and I'm asymptomatic, and ideally I'm just afraid of getting other people sick. So do as much to keep it contained within yourself, because you don't know. None of us know. But right now, South Dakota and Minnesota are two states that are not doing great right now. One of the other big things in the world is that there's a beef shortage. Jamie, my cousin, who turned me on to one of the creepiest haunted locations I've ever been to. She said that's probably something our grandma said. I could see that. So yeah, some meat packing places have potentially have had really bad stuff go on, where there's been a lot of cases. I guess the other big news is that there's been a couple people within the White House even that have tested positive. So nothing, you got to be safe everywhere. And no matter if your state opens up or not, just be smart. Try to protect yourself and protect those around you. I asked if anybody has cooked anything interesting in the last week. That's something I'm probably always going to ask, because I think a lot of people are doing things at home. And I believe I saw that my mom has tuned in, and I wanted to say here that eventually, when we can all hang out again, Mother's Day brunch, I'm making Eggs Benedict. I finally did that for the first time ever. It was actually easier. Cooking, when you actually do it, is a lot more demystified than you assume it would be. I thought, like, I'm going to make original hollandaise sauce, and it's not going to come from any mix. It really is just a lot of butter and a lot of egg yolks. So as long as you're good at separating egg, you're fine. Also, I wanted to ask, what's the weirdest thing you've seen sold out at a grocery store during this pandemic? That's something that we haven't talked about yet. Just the fact that going to a grocery store is completely unusual, completely different from any other time it's ever been throughout our lives, where, from just going, the stress of going, because now you're like scrubbed up like you're going into surgery. And I absolutely do wear the masks. And when it was colder out, I'd wear gloves and just keep the gloves on indoors. It's kind of weird to do that now when it's nice out again. But then I get home and maniacally scrub the skin off of my hands as I'm trying to make sure everything is safe and clean. And the thing that threw me was, I think it was pasta. Like, pasta is even kind of hard to find sometimes. Like, you see the huge pasta sauce. I don't think people cared that much about pasta, but suddenly that's the thing that one of the many things that has just disappeared. Yeast says, Lisa, because I know a lot of people are baking right now. And I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I baked for the first time ever. Frozen pizza is sold out. Sucks. I love pizza, says Amanda. And yeah, it's funny, there's a shortage of frozen pizza, and I guess Wisconsin is one of the biggest suppliers of frozen pizza. They've got the factories here, but we didn't hoard anything, but I do have 2 frozen pizzas for a rainy day if they disappear entirely from. It's also one of the funny things, frozen pizza is hard to find, but you could still get from, you know, Pizza Hut, Domino's, everybody that delivers, you can still get it pretty easily. So it's kind of wild that there's such a run on frozen pizza. Hair dye, says Mark. He blames it on his wife for knowing that information. I did not know about that. Dishwasher detergent, I haven't come across that one a lot. Of course, you know, I wonder if in my lifetime I'll see like a Clorox wipe again, or hand sanitizer. That's something that's just off the grid. And tortillas, says Amanda. So something I've noticed recently, and I'm curious if anybody else has, but it's been unusual to me. It's been noteworthy to me that certain topics have kind of like come in like waves, and suddenly everybody's talking about a certain thing. And again, I'm getting off of politically or current event type stuff now. And I first noticed it a couple weeks ago when somehow the topic of phantom pets or paranormal stories associated with animals began to be something that everybody was talking about. And I think I first noticed that on a See You on the Other Side Patreon hangout. And I, you know, and then suddenly another place was talking about it, another one, and then eventually the See You on the Other Side podcast did a whole episode about it. And then it began to shift that everybody, unrelated, began talking about haunted houses. And so that's what we're talking about today. And I do kind of wonder if now that fewer people are away busying themselves with a lot of the mundane, the humdrum of daily life, if somehow we are on this collective unconscious and we're sharing these psychically, these concepts are becoming more in the front of our minds. I should say that the latest edition of the Fantastic Story Society just came out this past weekend. We interviewed DJ McHale, who is a great friend, a huge inspiration and mentor, really, to me. He created Are You Afraid of the Dark? That really great Nickelodeon series that I know I grew up on, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen it as well. The Midnight Society. It's people sitting around a campfire telling scary stories. I always thought of it, even as a kid, you know, I was old enough when this was on, I was old enough that I was watching HBO, I was watching Tales from the Crypt, but then Are You Afraid of the Dark was kind of a younger kid's version, a younger person's version of it. And I can never get enough when it comes to telling scary stories. So even though I was old enough to be watching Tales from the Crypt, I would still double down and watch Are You Afraid of the Dark as well. And then DJ and we worked together, or really I worked for him. He was directing the TV show Flight 29 Down in Hawaii, and I worked on it for, we had 2 seasons and then a made-for-TV movie is how we wrapped it all up. My co-host Max Tim and we were talking with him about writing and storytelling, the craft of storytelling, and it turned out that, whoa, wouldn't you know it, he grew up in a haunted house as well, and he shared some of those stories about growing up in a haunted house. And you got to assume that to some degree affected the rest of his life. And the fact that he has, oh gosh, more than 10 books out. I think it's more than 24 books out, and they almost all have some element of a supernatural theme to it. So you would assume that growing up in a haunted house influenced that to some degree as a storyteller. And it was really funny. One of the things, and I'm not going to get into his story, you could find it on, if you search for the Fantastic Story Society, you can find it. And nobody can tell a story better than he can, since it's his own story. Though I do want to quickly shout out, thank you, iHeartRadio, that is now carrying us. We have really started to get more and more places. But as always, if you're a podcast catcher, if you search for it and you can't find it, let me know, and I'll make sure that we get ourselves listed there. But one thing that I asked DJ about is he said that he and his family, they kind of all had their own experiences with this haunted house, but they never talked about it until after they moved out. And I asked him, like, why do you think that is? And he said, well, I think if we all shared our stories, then we'd have to confront that it was real, that this wasn't just our imagination. It wasn't just one of us having a daydream or misinterpreting something that then it becomes real. And that really takes me back as well to when I was out in Napa with Max, and we were going to all of these haunted locations. And one night it just rained, and Max was feeling sick. He didn't want to go out anywhere. Of course I would, as I'm out here in the rain now. But I said, well, we're at this like old, somewhat creepy roadside motel, drive-in motel. Let's do an paranormal. Let's do an EVP session here, an investigation here. He said, no. I said, well, why not? He said, well, what if we find something? And I think that's why the concept of a haunted house is so creepy, because you want to be safe. You want to feel safe in the place where you lay your head, where you go to sleep each night. And I think that's why haunted houses can be extra creepy. Oh, and something else that's going on in the world of haunted houses right now is the Conjuring House is doing their live stream, which is so funny, because it was a couple weeks ago I had this idea for a horror movie. What would happen if this happened, the quarantine happens, or you're forced to be at home and not really go outside, but you live in a wildly haunted house? And then I didn't even think about the fact that the people that bought the house that the movie The Conjuring was inspired from, well, that's exactly what their situation is. And they are, I think it's currently going, you can buy day passes and get access to all of these live cameras that are throughout their house. And I was part of the Go On Scare Me podcast just last week. And so I spoke with Christy Strauss, who is the host of that podcast. And in addition to, so she got to interview the people that live in that house. I wasn't there for that, but she asked the audience to chime in if they had any haunted house stories of their own, and people by the scores submitted their haunted house stories, and then we read them, and I talked about them. It was really a lot of fun. While we are all in quarantine, in lockdown, there are a lot of people like myself who are trying to provide some free live streaming entertainment to everybody. Amelia Cotter, Chicago area author and storyteller, she does podcasts or live streams like this on Facebook every Tuesday, 6 p.m. It's family friendly. And this coming week, her theme for storytelling will be her own personal stories, including, she's from Maryland. So a lot of stuff will come out of her book that she wrote on Maryland ghost stories. And next, on Friday, 6:30, Ted and Robin, who are some of the greatest storytellers I've ever known, up there, DJ McHale level, they run the Haunted Galena Tour Company. And this is another one. Again, I keep forgetting that this keeps coming up. We just found out last week, and I'm not going to take any of the wind out of their sails, but they've lived in this amazing old early 1900s, I believe, schoolhouse, maybe late 1800s, I think early 1900s schoolhouse, and they've had no trouble there. They've been there for a couple of years, nothing. They've recently started having really eye-catching, slightly intense, it would give me the chills if I saw it, paranormal experiences in their house. So they're gonna tell some Galena stories, but including talking about what's going on at their house right now. So yes, another haunted house story. And then 2 o'clock Sundays, Mike and Wendy from Sunspot, they host a weekly podcast. The See You on the Other Side podcast is really, really great. But they're doing them live on YouTube and Facebook right now. I will post all of these links in the video description afterwards. Okay, so I actually am curious if anybody here has, late 1800s, says Robin. Thank you, Robin. And their place is just so beautiful, and it's so wild that suddenly it's haunted. It wasn't haunted before, it's haunted now. If anybody here has any stories they want to share, I do encourage you to. Oh, one more thing. I've just got too much content this time around, maybe. Talking about, if you watched Hellier, you'd know the word synchronicity, and you'd be maybe tired of hearing it. But it is these kind of like coincidences that everybody seems to be talking about certain things right now. And so I've started putting these live streams. I edit them down, I clean them up a little bit, and I post them on YouTube. And I'm really behind. One went live today. That was like episode 3 maybe. But on Friday or over the weekend, I posted the one that was about spirit attachment. So it was kind of our first real sit down. And someone commented, I only read the beginning of it, so I'm going to read most of this live for the first time. So in this one, I talk about a couple locations, including Robinson Woods Native American burial grounds, and the concept, this was an audience requested topic, of people having a ghost or a spirit or whatever come home, follow them home. And so this person commented, "This is bizarre. After not bringing it up much for years, a friend and I just the other day talked about a time when we were ghost hunting at Robinson Woods, and something seemed to follow several other people home. And we only talked about it because I'd just gotten a message on Reddit from a stranger asking me about an experience he'd had at Robinson Woods. I'm not on Reddit, so it was not me. Asking me because of a post I'd made years ago. After all these years, these woods are trying to reinsert themselves into my life all over again. That's fascinating. I would love to actually hear more about what did people experience with the spirit that followed someone home. In our case, it was not me. It was my research partner, Mary Serwinski. We were hearing these really bizarre sounds coming from the woods that would actually scare the deer away. It got more intense as the night went on, but then she began to hear these sounds in her house when she went home. And then she came back home to the woods, she came back to the woods. Home is not the woods. She came back to the woods and made an offering, and everything stopped. So that's fascinating. And the odds of, for this individual, I had something happen years ago and suddenly it just keeps popping up in my face all the time now. And this is not somebody that's a subscriber of mine, so I don't even know how he found my video then. So it's just wild. But I wanted to share some stories from the original version of my book. Now, this is the copy of the book, the version of my book that I self-published it, I think in the year 2000. And then eventually, several years later, a publisher picked it up and wanted to put it out again. And I did to actually distribute it to bookstores. And I said, well, you know, enough time has gone by. I want to rewrite it. I want to add a lot more. I've got so much more information now, and we've got even more stories to share, firsthand accounts, more history to share. So before we publish it, can I please update it? And they said, you have 2 weeks. I'm like, 2 weeks. All right. So, and in that 2 weeks, I also had to get all new photos because they didn't want to publish any photos that had already been published. So I had to not only rewrite, but also go on location to a whole bunch of different locations, which I did. I wrote more than 100 extra pages. And something else I wanted to do is I wanted to make this book, or the new book, feel different than the original book. So in both books, there's a chapter just about haunted houses, private residences. And I just took everything out from this book, erased it, and created a whole new chapter on haunted houses. So if you have the new book, you don't have any of the haunted house stories. And that was just kind of something that I wanted to do kind of for the future people. And for anybody that got the original book, then they have something that not everybody has. So I'm going to kind of quickly go over just a couple of the stories in here. One was the Stewart Pig Farm in Wadsworth, Illinois. So all of these stories will come from Northern Illinois. And I'm not going to read it out to you. I'm going to try to recap it a bit. But yeah, the old Stewart Pig Farm, I was able to talk with a woman named Susan Clark, who at this point, it's still a very rural area here, and they had segmented out the property so that there were several different people living here now. But the person that I interviewed was the person that was actually living in the original farmhouse that the Stewart family lived in the 1800s. And apparently nobody else on the property had any scary stories, any paranormal stories, but Susan and her roommate Michael had numerous stories, and they were visual. You know, usually you hear footsteps, or maybe an object moves or disappears from one place, shows up somewhere else. They were actually seeing entities, and it started when it seemed to revolve around outdoors and also the kitchen area. In the first instance, Susan was in her kitchen, and she saw what she thought was her roommate walk by outside, like he was coming home and going to the front door, and she realized that, wow, this is in the middle of the day, he should be at work, I wonder what's going on. So she got up and went to the window to look, and his car was not in the driveway, he was not there, there was no person there. Eventually, at a different time, Michael was walking on his way to another part of the house, and out of the corner of his eye noticed that Susan was standing at the sink doing dishes, but then when he got to the room he was walking towards, she was actually in that room. So then he, of course, doubled back, and there was nobody in the kitchen anymore. And things like that would happen a lot. Oh, and actually on Thanksgiving, she got up in the middle of the night. She had a whole bunch of family over, and she got up in the middle of the night to go get a glass of water. So again, walking into the kitchen, and she turned a corner, and you know how when you and somebody else are about to bump into each other as you're kind of taking a blind corner like that, she tensed up as somebody else was about to bump into her, and then that other entity ended up just passing through her. So it was a spirit entity, it seems. Something interesting that would happen frequently is the appearance of perhaps phantom cats. So getting back to phantom animals again, they would see regularly these small black animals. They assumed that they were cats. And one of the more dramatic times, it appeared in the middle of the living room while she was sitting on a chair and one of her collies was laying on the couch. They both saw this, and of course the collie got up and started chasing this thing through the house, and then it just disappeared in the middle of the room, undoubtedly leaving the collie just dumbfounded, looking around. An interesting thing that would happen, though, is Susan would have this one particular friend come over somewhat frequently, and anytime this person came over to spend the night, she would have dreams that she was in that house hundreds of years ago with the Stewart family. And the Stewart family, in addition to raising pigs, they also bred miniature pinschers. Now, we don't know. This isn't proof of anything. We have not been able to verify whether or not that's legit, whether or not the Stewart family actually did raise min pins. But it's kind of amazing to think that, well, maybe this woman is sensitive to some degree, and when she's having dreams, she is actually going back in time. The most extreme instance happened when a storm fired up, and she gathered her dogs and went inside the old barn to just kind of gather them, keep them safe. And as she's petting the dogs, and then she stands up and turns around, and she finds she's nose to nose with the old farmer that used to live there 100 years ago. And she said she just turned around and closed her eyes and tried to not freak out. I mean, I don't know how in the world I would react in that situation. Not nearly that contained and together. So farmhouse in Barrington. And this individual house that I was talking with the owners of, they were very laid back about things. So they were not at all hyping anything up. But they did say that their basement scares the hell out of them. So for one, and again, getting back to animals that continue to tie in here, the animals would not go into the basement at all under any circumstance. Dogs, this is. There were two roommates. One of them hated to go down there. It was only like if it was daylight, and if it was absolutely mandatory, they would go in the basement. Otherwise, they wouldn't. The other roommate had never, ever been in the basement. I mean, to think that you have part of your house that you're paying to live in, and part of it is just so undesirable that you've never ever been in it. That's kind of the intensity of haunted locations, how intense they can be. But the thing that would be most commonly observed, it would only be heard, and it would be at night. It wasn't really assigned to any certain time, but it would only happen if everybody in the house was in bed. They would hear somebody walking up and down the staircase that goes between the first floor and the second floor, and it was kind of just an unmistakable reoccurring sound. And the fact that it would only happen if everybody is in bed means that nobody actually knows if there was any visual apparition that accompanied this. It would be really wild to find out, like, if they would ever put a camera up. But just as I was talking about in the previous one before getting interrupted, they didn't want to put a camera up because they don't want to know. They'd rather just like, okay, the staircase gets creaky and it sounds like footsteps, but I don't want to be for sure that this place is haunted and there's something going up and down the staircase at night. There is, on the same property, again, they're in an old farmhouse in Barrington, and there's a barn from the same time period on the property that had been subleased out by some company. They were operating out of it, and apparently the activity over there was even more regular. It was happening all the time, and it was intense enough that it actually really freaked out the workers of that place. And it would mostly happen at night as they were cleaning up, resetting the location for the next day. There'd be, and I don't know. I think it was more of an office type setting, but they were working obviously in a barn, so maybe even a warehouse type thing. But they would clean up for the night, and then they would hear talking come from some other room in the barn. The employees would go to see, like, hey, did somebody sneak in here? Is there somebody else in that we don't know about? And they wouldn't find anybody. And then they would come back and they'd find that all of the work that they had done had been reset, object moved back into place. And that's when they would just say, like, I'm not comfortable, and we'll let the morning crew handle this one. And this is the one that I'm going to spend a little bit of time reading, because this was the more dramatic one, and I actually haven't read this in a long time, and we'll see if I'm good at this. When I read my own writing, I'm only critiquing it in my head. It's hard to just read it. That's why I don't really do live readings at all. But the first speech I ever gave was, oh gosh, I wish I could remember where this was now. It may have been in Round Lake, because that's where this location is. But Dale Kazmarek, who runs the Ghost Research Society, He was not able to make it to a library to give a speech, and somehow my phone number ended up in the hands of the booking people, and I'd never given a speech in my life, and suddenly now I find myself on the drive to go give a speech at this place, which was so much fun, and I got really hooked right away to public speaking. I've enjoyed that since. But at the end of it, there was a girl named Lisa Rowe who was really into the paranormal. Some of her photos appear in this book, and probably just this book. I don't know if it made it into the other book. But she came to a couple of different locations, and she said, I'm going to go to this house that I've heard about that has a lot of activity going on, and they're open to talking about it. Would you want to come along? Absolutely. So that's another one of the great reasons you go out, and whether you're going to a paranormal conference or just giving speeches somewhere publicly, is you get to hear more stories that haven't been published, and you can get some scoops this way. So we are going to a very modest 2-story house in Round Lake. This is a home that had been in this family's ownership for a long time. And so it had passed down through multiple generations. So the same families lived there who had lived there. A lot of people had come and gone. And I do remember that. I think there were multiple generations living there when I was there. So a former resident, a man we'll simply call Jake, was something of an antisocial guy. He was very particular with whom he spent his time. Often when he was on the second floor of the house and he heard people conversing on the first floor, he would come partially down the spiral staircase and then just peek around the edge to see if he wanted to join that group or not. This is a guy who either completely got along with people or completely did not. He's a guy who did not hide his emotions. In the end, Jake became sick. Struck down with disease, he had an oxygen tank and mask follow him wherever he went. Even after death, Jake is particular with whom he spends his time. The most constantly ongoing visual event occurs while sitting on the first floor living room. Jake has been seen walking down the stairs, then stopping to see who is in the room, and then returning back upstairs where his bedroom was. The first ever sighting of seeing Jake was from a neighbor who was walking past the home. She noticed the man standing in the living room when she knew that there wasn't anybody in the home. The most eye-catching thing about this presumed intruder was that he was wearing an oxygen mask. When informing the family of what she saw, it became clear that Jake was still around. There's another neighborhood woman who has had a more confrontational experience with this departed man. The two were openly antagonistic against each other when Jake was alive, despite the fact that she was still considered a family friend and close with many of the other family members. She has only visited the house once since his death. While visiting, this neighbor was standing inside the kitchen under a display of antique kitchen utensils when a serving spoon from the early 1900s lifted itself off a hook that was hanging on and dropped right in front of her. Startled but not really thinking anything of it, she moved to another location in the kitchen. Jake responded to her move by launching a 6-pound can of tomato paste across the kitchen from the counter, landing at her feet. And so if this isn't clear, they had kind of one of those racks that have a whole bunch of hooks on it. You can, hang spoons or pots or pans by the little hooks in the handles. And so first off, for the spoon to have fallen, it would have to defy gravity and come up over that hook and then to fall off. And I remember so clearly them showing me this can. I said, wow, it was something about this size. Like, no, this is the thing. This is the item that was thrown. And it was this just ginormous Costco, Sam's Club can of tomato paste. And that's when I took note that, yeah, it was 6 pounds. And then I compare it a little bit to death can offer a freedom from responsibility, whether it be a ghost who steals drinks at a Chicago bar, an old man who grabs the legs of pretty young women at Old St. Andrew's Inn, which is now Old St. Andrew's Inn was this great old pub that went out of business and now reopened. And it's super modern, but it is very haunted. I don't know if it's still open at this point, of course, but I can't remember the name of it offhand, but if anybody wants to look that up, and when the world does open up again, the staff is very open to talking about the hauntings at this location that used to be the Old St. Andrew's Inn. I think it was in the Edgewater neighborhood of Chicago. Jake's bedroom is now used as the bedroom for a young boy. Though this child is aware of the reportings of apparitions in other parts of the house, he claims nothing out of the ordinary happens in this room. Though he may have felt cold spots and even the feeling of wind shifting through the room where there couldn't have possibly been one. So upon entering the domicile, the only thing I picked up on was the family atmosphere. A number of adults were in the family room enjoying a football game on television while their children played in the backyard. Throughout the staircase and kitchen, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then we reached the bedroom. Lisa and I were inspecting the room when suddenly Lisa felt an extreme cold spot pass next to her. An inspection of the vents revealed no heat or AC was on. And a closer look at the windows showed that not only were they sealed tight, but they also had that reinforced winter double pane glass and plastic over it. So definitely no breeze was getting through there. As our conversation in the room continued, I took a seat previously occupied by Lisa, and it wasn't long before I also felt something pass by me, brush past me. It continued for about 10 seconds. At this point, I called for Lisa to take a picture with her 35mm, this is back in the film days still, camera that she was holding. The resulting picture showed a mist immediately off to my right, just kind of past my elbow. One can imagine what this picture may have looked like if I had only called for her to take this picture immediately when I first felt the sensation of something brush past me. So yeah, that is a little look back at some of the original stories of Voices from the Chicago Grave. Oh, and I won't really get into it, but I do talk a little bit about the mobile home community in Des Plaines, which is where it's most known as the site of the crash of Flight 191. So just barely outside of O'Hare. It's where the plane actually crashed. This happened in 1979, and it was the biggest aviation disaster in U.S. history until 9/11 happened, which kind of tells you the scale of it. And it's kind of amazing to think that this place where Mary Serwinski, my research partner, and I, we arrived and we immediately bumped into this big group of kids. They all live here. They all pal around together. It's like we were with the Stranger Things kids. And even more so because their life is spent growing up in this place where the town history is that about 200 people died, or 270 or so people died right where they live now. And they talk about the fact that when it rains a lot, when the ground is totally saturated, objects back from the crash era will float up to the surface. So it's really, really pretty remarkable. There are some ghost stories associated with that location, but even ghost stories that aren't part of the crash of Flight 191. So whether it's just kids telling a lot of stories, having urban legends, which we all had growing up, or if there's something going on a bigger level at that location, it's really interesting to note. I super thank everybody that stuck with us as we got booted once and then rejoined here for this time. I'm going to try to come back. Maybe it's 7:30 next time. 8 o'clock was a little bit late because I do like to do these outside. Oh my gosh, Gina said that her my friend's mom was on that flight. I do actually want to mention this, and I meant to say it much earlier on as we were kind of doing a little virus recap, that a couple of weeks ago, I had two friends that each had a mom that was dealing with COVID. And since that time, one of those friends, their mom has been getting treatment and is recovering. And in that time, the other friend's mom has passed away. So this is, we see these crazy numbers, whether we're talking about the 300 almost people who died on the crash of Flight 191, or the 1,500 people that are dying every day in America, or the 600 people that are dying every day in Brazil now. But this is a serious ongoing thing. And I don't like to talk about politics on this channel ever, but I just try to continue to make it aware that, yes, it's up to us to do everything we can to keep ourselves safe and keep the people around us safe. So I thank you all so much. If you guys have any comments or suggestions on what you would like me to talk about in the future, there are tons of different paranormal topics we can talk about, and I can yammer on just about everything. So if anybody hasn't yet seen, I put a video out I'm very happy about. It's only 3 minutes long. It's an easy watch. Very unique location down in. Oh, I'm going to answer, Jamie, I'm going to answer your question as soon as I finish with this thought, because it is actually a haunted house story now. Oh yeah, there's a video I did that came out last week about a place called Berry Tavern, which is in Shullsburg, Wisconsin, in southwest Wisconsin. Just an amazing place with an incredible story. And it's something that I can't believe I've never heard about before. I can't believe not every single ghost show has been there, because it's really amazing. But the link to that is over on the What's Your Ghost Story page. Jamie asks, do you think Sunnybrook residents have visitors from the old asylum? It would be interesting to see if you could interview those people now. And this is one of the great things. So Jamie's talking about a place out in the Fox Lake, Ingleside area that used to be a tuberculosis sanitarium. Before that, it was like a New Age utopia called the Spirit Fruit Society. Jacob Bielhart ran it. You get into a lot of history here because it's a really amazing place. But it was also one of the most intensely scary haunted places I've ever been in my life. Thank you, Jamie, for that. That's how I closed the book, because that's definitely the grand finale. And without me even having a chance to look into what you are asking, now it's been built over. It's a community on top of most of it. I have had one resident that moved into her house and asked me why it's so haunted. And she gave me her address. I did a historical overlay, and her house is right on top of where one of the original buildings stood. So the answer, very quick, is yes, there is activity still going on. And it might be residual. The entities from way back when might not know about the current residents, but they're just still going on their hauntings. Or maybe there is something conscious there, and it's not happy with the fact that their building got bulldozed, and now there's some new suburbanites living on top of where they used to live. So yeah, it's something I want to look into a lot more. But the answer is yes, I actually do know that there is activity associated with that place today. Again, thanks for watching. What'sYourGhostStory.com and all social media. What's Your Ghost Story. I'll see you in a week.